Hi everyone, I'm going to start going through the social and emotional development in middle adulthood slides. Of course, the best part of this will be the amazing stock photos that are throughout. I hope you find this enjoyable, at least somewhat. I know, um, once again, middle adulthood is not the most interesting component of human development for many students, but hopefully you get something out of this. So Dr. Starling talks a lot in her lecture slides about MIDUS, which is the Midlife Development in the United States study. Um, she wrote in here, and I think our textbook isn't up to date, that this was completed in the 90s. However, this is actually a longitudinal study that's been continued. The last installment was completed in 2013, and there are many results that have been compiled about the study. It's a longitudinal study, and it looks at, in some cases, the same population of people that they started interviewing in 1995 and 1996 to get the initial data. So they followed these people over time to look at their life satisfaction as they're going through their midlife time. I'm including the link to the study here. What I'd like you guys to do is actually go and look on the site, look at the data, look at the scope of the study, and see what it's about. I think your textbook also outlines something about Midas, but I really didn't refer to that much. I just would like you to go and look at the actual site for Midas because it's a pretty cool study, and it's really hard to do studies like this that are longitudinal and follow the same population over time. So what I'd like you to do is just go and look at the website, and then there's a discussion board for Midas in the middle adulthood slides for social and emotional development. And I'd like you just to kind of look around and then talk about on the discussion board why you find this study interesting personally. So just give me a little bit of detail about what you learned, what you saw, and why you found it interesting. So we're going to talk a little bit about Erikson, Levinson, and Valiant. So as you know, Erikson has several stages of development, and every one there is a conflict that is faced. So there's always that versus in the middle. For this stage of Erikson, it's generativity versus stagnation. This is the stage in middle adulthood. It goes from 40 to the age of 65. It is the second to last stage that Erikson puts um, in his sorry about that, that Erikson has as part of his theory of aging. So as far as what generativity versus stagnation is concerned, this is the stage in life where people, if they're on the generativity end of the spectrum, they're going to be reaching out to others, helping others, and trying to provide knowledge to the next generation. Whereas if they're in stagnation, they're probably, your idea of what you think of as like a grumpy aging person who doesn't really want to help anybody else, is selfish and is not concerned with the younger generation or youths, if you will. Um, and they are sorry, it's really fun recording when your husband's sitting next to you also doing work and you can't keep a straight face because he's continuously making faces at you while you were recording. Um, so anyway, so it also isn't helpful when you have to do these recordings after your kids go to bed and it is 9:40 at night, which is late when you're old. So as far as stagnation is concerned, these are your people that are more focused on themselves, and what they're doing and who they are, and not necessarily concerned with those other individuals in their lives or individuals who are in younger generations. So here are your first really happy stock photos for the slides. That family looks lovely there in their color coordinating outfits. I really enjoy the picture of Yoda because he's a big fan favorite in our house. My 3-year-old actually calls him my friend Yoda, so you can take that as a little fun fact. So as far as generativity is concerned, this is pretty much what I was just saying, that it involves um, those people who are on the side of the spectrum that they're really concerned with helping others learn and carrying the torch in any of their knowledge or stories or history, continuing cultures and family and things that are of importance to the family. So their big things involve teaching, parenting, and mentoring those that are younger than them, making sure that their knowledge is passed on to the lower generation. As far as those in the stagnation stage, I'm not quite sure what navel gazing means, so I'm just going to kind of let you guys figure that out. I think it's in your text. But like it says here, I'm kind of a big deal. That's people who are focused on themselves, not really focused on anything that surrounds other people or the development of our society moving forward. Um, so this is just a graph that looks at how people feel over time as far as their age is concerned. So if you look at generativity in their 30s, people aren't really that concerned about generativity when they're rating how high their concern is about it. It gets a little bit higher in the 40s, and as you can see in the 50s, people are much more concerned with generativity. Concern about aging also goes up. Identity security becomes stronger as we are in the middle adulthood years, and so does our sense of competence. So, generally speaking, those who hit generativity and are on that side of the spectrum are usually well adjusted. They're open minded, they're the best parents, they really enjoy wearing nice sweaters and button down shirts on boats and strangely looking off into the distance when they are posing for photos. So, in a study by Dan McAdams and his colleagues, he interviewed groups of midlifers, those who behave generatively, generatively, and those who have less are less generative as adults and are more towards the stagnation end of the spectrum. Um, in these in these interviews, he saw that people basically came up with narratives that related to their life stories. And these narratives often included things like a high point, a low point, a turning point, and important scenes from childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. When he analyzed these storylines and themes, it revealed that adults high and low in generativity reconstruct their past and anticipate their future in different ways. So when he looked at those generative adults, the people who were highly generative, there was usually a sequence of events that the researchers called commitment stories. And in these commitment stories, adults talked about things like giving back to family, the community, and society. They usually talked about being at a special advantage, having a good family and talent, and also have early awareness of the suffering of other people and seeing that there are other people in need that need things that they might possess. Um, there's also a clash between blessing and suffering in these individuals that are highly generative. Um, and sometimes people view themselves as being called or committed to being good to others. Um, Sometimes there's also a theme of redemption, that it's thought that um, highly generative adults frequently describe scenes with extremely negative life events, which involved failure and frustration, death, um, and those things. And usually they take these to lead to personal renewal, improvement, and enlightenment. So highly generative adults tell stories in which bad scenes usually turn good, and they talk about how the things that they've come across in life that are hard for them have helped them find a way to overcome it and do better and give back. Those who are less generative tend to tell more stories of contamination where good events turn bad, and they're much more negative and tend not to look at the positive end of things. So these stories were very interesting because they showed a lot about how people look at their lives with meaning and purpose. Adults high and low in generativity didn't differ in the number of positive and negative events included in their narratives. They just interpreted those events differently. Um, Commitment stories that were filled with redemption involved a way of thinking about the self that fosters a caring and compassionate approach to others. These stories can help people realize that although their personal story will end someday, that they're able to pass these things down to their other generations. So that's it for Erickson for this age range, and we're going to talk a little bit about Levinson in the middle adult transition. The big component of this transition in life is that those in middle adulthood tend to evaluate their success in meeting the goals that they had set for themselves in early adulthood and deciding how they feel about where they're at now currently. Something that happens during this middle adult transition is the realization that there's more time behind a person than lying ahead of a person, so that their time on this earth is getting shorter, and that they have less time in life to change and possibly make new goals in life. So, because of this, a lot of people regard that the remaining years are precious and they should start making changes in their life structure to make them feel more happy. Sometimes these are smaller changes and sometimes they become larger changes. And this might be, in some ways, why we start to think of people in middle adulthood of having things like midlife crises. So, in Levinson Seasons of Life, the middle adult life structure involves a lot of reassessment, trying to decide what changes we should make. And Levinson stated that during this time, there are four developmental tasks that each adult goes through, with two opposing tendencies to figure out exactly um, what changes they might need to make in life. So these are the four different challenges that a person faces. We have the young versus old challenge, and where a person needs to seek new ways of feeling youthful and also old. This means giving up certain youthful qualities, changing others, and finding positive meanings in being older. Sometimes we see the double standard of aging becoming involved here, especially with women who might express concern about appearing not as attractive as they age. Um, and middle aged men, particularly non college educated men, um, are also highly sensitive to physical aging in this stage because if they have blue collar jobs, which require more physical strength and stamina, they might be more worried about what might occur in their bodies now that they're getting older. The next is destruction versus creation, and this is where individuals have to acknowledge past hurtful acts and try to leave legacy for future generations. So, knowing that mortality is happening in the future and could happen sooner rather than later, an individual might try to make redemption for the acts where they hurt other people, such as parents or their children or coworkers or friends. They might try to also be more generative and get involved in activities that lead to leaving a legacy for future generations, it leads to better human welfare, um, and leaves a legacy behind for themselves. Masculinity versus femininity. The thought is that the middle aged person has to create a balance between their masculine and feminine parts of themselves. For men, this means greater acceptance of being more nurturing and caring, enhancing close relationships, and trying to be compassionate. And for women, it's thought that this generally means leading to more autonomy and independence and being more assertive as you age. At times in life during the middle adulthood stage, people might be confronted with losing a spouse, and something like that might occur where there have to be changes in how a person acts based on no longer having that person in their life who's been a big part in maybe um, being the more gendered personality. And the last is engagement versus separateness, where a person is trying to find a balance between being a part of their external world and being independent. So a lot of times this might mean reducing things that you previously thought were really important, that involve being in the community, or maybe like at work you used to participate a lot in activities outside of the office or stay later or whatever the case may be, and now you feel like it's not as necessary to do that extraneous stuff and really spend more time focusing on yourself and your family and whatnot. And lastly, in the stages of development in the social and emotional years of middle adulthood, we have Valiant's adaptation to life. Valiant's main thing here in middle adulthood is that he believes that we as aging individuals become keepers of meaning when we hit middle adulthood. Um, we become less personal in our goals and we're not thinking as much about ourselves anymore and our own advancement, but we need to start thinking about the advancement of other people that we care about, other generations below us, and really focusing on passing the torch and making sure that our cultures and stories and other societal things of importance are passed on. This brings us to midlife crisis. And my question here for you is, what do you think of when you hear the term midlife crisis? What does it bring to mind? Maybe there's a particular scene in a movie that you think of when you think of midlife crisis. And this is actually something where I would like you to go on the discussion board and and just answer what you think of when you hear the term midlife crisis. Talk a little bit about um, what usually comes to mind here. Maybe there's an example in particular you think of. Just give me a couple sentences regarding this information. So, what is a midlife crisis? Levinson stated that it was a time of inner turmoil, and Valiant stated that during this time of inner turmoil, change is slow and steady. According to the Midas study, there are many work related turning points. Women might hit a midlife crisis earlier than men, and notice that they want to make changes in their lives. So a lot of times when you're thinking midlife crisis, the thought may come to mind of some huge sharp disruption where the person has this like aha moment and they go crazy and they go buy a red Corvette and they ditch their husband or wife and find a trophy husband or wife, and really just like there's like this insane change that happens. That's usually, the media depiction of a midlife crisis, and this is for the most part very uncommon. Um, Usually it's smaller changes. It might involve changes in career, it might involve changes socially, and there might be some changes that occur, like deciding to get a divorce once your children have left the home and things like that, because you're starting to realize that you want different things in life than you wanted before. We also see that there are differences in the way we handle our life regrets in middle adulthood. Um, our interpretation is differently. We use past experience a lot to look at our regrets in life and decide what we really want to be different as we get older. So this goes back to the idea of a stage view versus a life events view. Um, if you remember all the way back from the beginning of the course where you talked about the stage view being very much, like steps that we developmentally transition as we age, versus life events where we have just adaptations or adaptations to normative life events. And as we hit different life events, some of which depend upon our society that we live on, some that depend upon the situations we're in, um, how we change. Um, the thought is in middle adulthood, we have a combined result of both the stage view of growing older and the social experiences that we have as we age. So, moving on to stability and change in self concept and personality. Um, as we get older, our idea of who we want to be and our idea of who we are, ourself, um, tends to change a little bit with hopes of what we still want to become. And then also there are fears of what we might become. So what this means is basically, there's certain things that we might set as goals, things that we'd like to reach and achieve as we age. But then there's the idea of as we age, there are certain things that could occur that can be scary or overwhelming. So as we age, we might lose some of our faculties. We might lose the ability to be independent. There's a thought that there'll be health issues that come up. There's a thought that you might have more mental health issues as you age, such as diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And in some cases, these worries can become a part of who we are as a person, and concerns we have as we get older. This is a very complex time in life. We have a lot of different roles as we age in middle adulthood. So there could be the idea that we are working on our career still. We could be parents still. We could be becoming grandparents. So there are those different descriptions and social roles we have. We're still trying to be friends. We're still trying to perhaps be a spouse. So there are all these different roles that we could be a part of now as we're aging. Um, there is an increase usually with the self in self-acceptance and independence or autonomy, and then mastery of the situations that we're in. Once again, there's some information about Midas that you can refer to probably in your text, and then also you can refer to it on the study website that I provided to you earlier. We also see that as we age, our coping skills improve when we're influenced by stressors. And you can see that um, women tend to fare better in the coping strategies than males. Um, but in general, we're doing pretty good as coping strategies are concerned. Sorry, I was misreading the graph for a second there. There's also a thought that women tend to increase more in masculine traits and men tend to increase more in feminine traits during this time. And this is the thought that as we age, women tend to become more confident and self sufficient and independent, whereas men tend to become more emotionally sensitive, caring, and considerate. And they might also become more dependent on their caregivers or their loved ones. Um, these trends appear both cross-sectionally and in longitudinal research. It doesn't matter what the SES is or the culture. It tends to be something that is pretty consistent as well with Levinson's theory involving gender identity in midlife and a person having a mixture of masculine and feminine characteristics. So, as far as gender identity is concerned during this age range, um, one evolutionary view is the parental imperative theory. And this is the idea that identification with traditional gender roles is maintained during the active parenting years to help ensure the survival of children. Men are more goal oriented, and women are more emphasized nurturing. Um, Once children have aged, these roles change and relax. Um, there are some criticisms to this. It could depend upon things like career experiences, and um, you need both aspects to parent well. You need to both be goal oriented and emphasize nurturance. So, this isn't a be all end all of gender identity. As far as relationships are concerned in middle adulthood, we see that this is the time in life where we have the most close relationships than any other period. So we have family relationships. As I mentioned, there might be um, the relationship of still being a parent. There's a relationship possibly of being a spouse, and there's a relationship of being a grandparent starting in middle adulthood. There are also work relationships and relationships we form in the community and friendships that might continue on as we are in middle adulthood. As far as marriage is concerned in middle adulthood, um, in middle those that are currently in middle-aged households, they're typically doing very well monetarily as compared to other age groups. There might be a need for review and adjustment of marital relationships. We see this happening a lot as children are leaving the home and going off to college or into adulthood. That married couples might look at their relationships and see if there are things that they are not satisfied with and might want to change now that they have that freedom and ability to do so. There might also be this time of more focus on your marriage in middle adulthood as individuals are aging, or children are aging and leaving the house. So now that you're not focusing so much on parenting, you might be able to focus more on your marriage and things that you'd like to be different. Um, this is predictive also of well being, that individuals, if they're reviewing and adjusting their marriage and figuring out how to continue it on a good path, that they tend to be more successful psychologically and personally in that marriage. We do see an increase in divorce in 50 to 65-year-olds over the past 20 years. That rate has doubled. It's more likely that those who are remarried or highly educated that they divorce. And some of this is because that as people have aging children and children that are leaving the home, there's a higher likelihood that they stayed together because of their kids, and now that their kids are moving on, they feel comfortable ending that marriage and moving on as well. We do see that while divorce at any age is really hard on an individual, that those in midlife tend to adapt more easily than younger people. There was a survey done with 13,000 Americans that revealed that following divorce, middle aged men and women reported less decline in psychological well being than younger counterparts. Part of this is because we have more life experience, which leads to better problem solving and coping strategies, and that reduces the stressful impact of divorce. Um, One of the reasons that we see highly educated and middle aged adults are more likely to divorce is because usually they have more comfortable economic circumstances, and that makes it easier to leave an unhappy marriage. Um, but for many women, this can reduce the standard of living. And so here we have the term feminization of poverty, which is a trend in which women who support themselves or their families are the majority of the adult population living in poverty, regardless of age and ethnic group. Unfortunately, there are weak public policies that safeguard families, and this leads to a problem with the gender gap in poverty in the United States. So So there are many reasons why people tend to end marriages in middle adulthood. Women tend to say that there are communication issues and inequality in the relationships. There might be also issues with distancing as you age, um, adultery, use issues, and then, of course, things like physical and verbal abuse. Sometimes women also have a desire for autonomy and independence, and they don't feel that they can get that in their current marriage. Men also bring up poor communication and also tend to say that things like being a workaholic or not being attentive in the marriage led to the failure. Women are more likely than men to initiate divorce, and those who do fare better in psychological well being. Men who initiate the split already have another romantic involvement to turn to, according to research. There's also some longitudinal evidence that shows that middle aged women who weather divorce successfully tend to become more tolerant, comfortable with uncertainty, non confirming, and self reliant in their personality. So, moving on to parenting. This is a time in life in middle adulthood where we see that we have the launching of the children. This is essentially when you put your children into a giant cannon and you fire them off into the distance. And once again, my husband making gestures. Honestly, that is not what launching of the children is, but that is the mental image that I always get when I start to talk about this topic. So you have to go to the hardware store, like Lowe's or Home Depot have these giant cannons where you can get them and you can launch your children. Sometimes you might want to do this earlier than others. Most people they wait to adulthood when their kids are heading off to college or when they're getting married. But some people feel that way about their kids when they're like 5 and 3, like ours. No, I'm just kidding. Seriously. So I'm just actually seeing what kinds of reactions I can get out of my husband as I'm sitting here recording this. And hopefully you don't all think I'm completely insane, or you do, and this is just very entertaining for you. So really what launching the children is that this is a time in life where we see individuals leaving the home, moving on, growing up, and parents have what we think of as empty nest syndrome. So all of their kids have moved out of the house, and they now have no longer have the responsibility of parenting like they did previously. I enjoy that we felt that the movie's failure to launch the pictures there for that movie. It's really not a very good movie at all. The best part of the movie involves a character that's not very isn't one of the main characters in the movie who decides to shoot a bird in her yard. It's the funniest part of the movie. The rest of it is like kind of hit or miss. There's really not much you need to know about it. So you might see when when people are facing an empty nest that there is some separation anxiety on the parents' end about their child leaving to go to college or leaving to go off into adulthood. Um, or versus in this comic on the first day of school when kids are going off to school they don't want to and the parents trying to get them to go. When it's the first day of college, it's the kids all ready to leave and the parent is trying to hold them back because they're going to miss them. So as far as relationships are concerned with adult children, you might see during this time that the family expands with the addition of in-laws, and that there are a lot more people in the family that parents have to accommodate or have relationships with than they did before. Usually, the female in the relationship is known as the kin keeper. So, the women in middle adulthood tend to be the people that make sure that are still family gatherings as people age, that celebrations still occur, and making sure that everyone stays in touch. Um, that people are continuing to call in the family, call other members of the family, siblings, and parents, and so on. We also see that sometimes grandparenthood starts in middle adulthood. The average age of grandparenthood is in the 50s. This is a very significant milestone for many people. Most people look forward to being grandparents. Some people fight being grandparents because they don't think they should be old enough to be grandparents. But for the most part, it tends to be a very positive milestone. Grandparents are often seen as valued elders. They see their grandchildren. Um, as a sign of their immortality, somebody that's going to be learning all the different things about their culture and generation. So we have that passing of the torch, and also they get to be re-involved with their past. So where they got to see their children being raised, they now get to see their grandchildren being raised and experience many of the things that they saw with their own children as they were growing up. Grandparents are also thought to be often indulgent. They're able to spoil their grandchildren, provide things to them that they don't have to worry about it being, having rules against things and so on and so forth. There is a bigger role of grandparents now too as primary caregivers. Um, Sometimes we see that grandparents are taking care of kids as babysitters as well when parents are working. So individuals in middle adulthood are now more likely than ever to have living parents. It used to be that because we didn't have as good of health care and things like that, that when people hit middle adulthood, a lot of the time their aging parents had already passed away and were no longer able to share a relationship. Um, it's now much more common for people to provide help to parents, older parents. A lot of times it's things like financial or household aid, helping around the house because aging parents are no longer able to do things for themselves that they were once able to do. There might be some caregiving provided, roles of, making sure that person's getting to medical appointments that they need to get to if they're unable to take themselves. Um, and just generally being a support to those parents as they age. This is based a lot on the earlier relationship that those in middle adulthood had with their parents when they were growing up. If you didn't have a great relationship with your parents as a child or adolescent or young adult, you're less likely to provide the support to your aging parents. We also are seeing an increase in what's known as the sandwich generation. So these are people that are in middle adulthood, but are not just raising their own children still, but also are supporting aging parents. So they're caregiving on both ends of the spectrum, their own children and those that are older than them. This is because we see that there once again is more medical care and there's more likelihood that people are going to live longer lives. This can be thought of as highly stressful because it can take up a lot of time. 10 to 20 hours per week is the average. 50% of the people in the sandwich generation are also already employed with their own jobs. They have a lot of strain in trying to keep up on tasks and do everything that they need to do. And there's a lot of emotional strain that can go on because it can be a very time consuming and difficult relationship or difficult place to be in life. So this is just a chart looking at how baby boomers care for how the percentage of baby boomers that are caring for aging parents. And you can see that a lot of the time, um, those in uh, those in adulthood that are non-working and working, um, females tend to be more likely to be caring for a parent than those who are males that are non-working and working. So a lot of the time, what you might see is that the person caring for the parent is the daughter in the family, even if there are other children involved. It tends to be that as parents age, that the woman, if there's a daughter in the family, they're the most likely to move closer to home if there's an issue. They're more likely to try to take on responsibility and help care for that parent as that parent ages. And also, it's seen that it's much more common for if it's the husband's parent that's aging for the female in the relationship to still take care of that aging parent. So moving on to vocational life. Research shows that job satisfaction increases in midlife in most diverse nations and at all levels from executive positions to hourly workers. The relationship here is weaker for women than for men, probably because there's less advancement for women. Um, it's also weaker for blue collar than for white collar workers, perhaps because blue collar workers have less control over work schedules and activities. So, some of the things that we see change as we get older involving career satisfaction is that we tend to become more happy with our work. Um, we have more contentment with supervision, pay, and promotion um, than we did previously. There's also an improved capacity to cope with difficult situations in work, which helps us be more happy about our jobs. Um, and there might be greater access to more attractive jobs as we get older, which can be lead to more work satisfaction. Um, but along with this, the more we work can lead to an increase in burnout, which is basically when you have long term job stress, and every job has its own stresses that can lead to mental exhaustion, feeling like you don't have control, and having a lot of feelings of reduced accomplishment. This happens to occur more in helping professions such as healthcare professions, psychology, human services, social work, teaching, those jobs that tend to work more with people and have a lot of demands placed on them. Um, People who are in these types of jobs overall tend to be more psychologically healthy, but it can be a much more difficult or unsupportive work environment. And it tends to be, in some ways, more excessive work than in other positions, and that can lead to burnout. Of course, burnout can cause a lot of problems for a person. There's impaired attention and memory. It can lead to mental health issues like depression and anxiety, more physical illness, and problems with turnover, job performance, and wanting to be absent from work. So hopefully, none of you ever experience burnout. And you can see in this comic here we have stressed Eric versus burnout Eric, whereas Eric looks really stressed in the first picture, and in the second picture, he's become so stressed that he can no longer apologize or he can no longer pose for cartoons. Um, so, as far as career development is concerned, we see a decrease in how far careers can develop in middle adulthood. I decided to provide you guys with a compilation of my favorite stock images here of the glass ceiling. If you do a Google search for glass ceiling, you get a lot of really amazing photos, and these are just four of them. So, Dr. Starling included the one in the bottom right hand corner where the guy is just looking like he's trying to knock on the ceiling and say, just let me out, just set me free. The woman above him seems very confused about what a glass ceiling is, and she seems to think that she can just kind of lift it up. Um, the one to the left of the man in the corner, she looks like she's trying to escape or is in some sort of horror movie, and the other guy in the on the far left is really just too tall for the glass ceiling that's involved in his office space. So I feel kind of bad for him because he must have a lot of cramps in his neck. Generally, though, what we see happening is that there is a lot of limits to advancement in the workforce when we get older. We've a lot of people hit the amount of training that they can do. They can't go any further, become trained more, um, and we do see that there is a higher risk of having a glass ceiling for women and minorities. Women are a lot more likely to not achieve as high paying jobs or um, as jobs that involve more career advancement than males, and that goes this is that goes is the same for minorities. Um, so we do see that sometimes that if people feel that they can't advance their career anymore, they might decide to have a career change. Usually, this is a small change. They might just leave one line of work for a related one. Might find something that might be a more fulfilling business, or things like that, because they feel like they're just stagnant in their career and they want something different. We also see that in middle adulthood, uh, in this age span, these individuals are the most likely to be downsized and let go. Um, Unemployment tends to last longer for people who lose their jobs in middle adulthood because most companies and places of employment are tending to hire younger individuals that have more abilities for future training, and also those who are older in middle adulthood sometimes don't get employed because they're looking for a higher salary, whereas those who are younger might be more willing to start out as a lower salary rate. It can really depend on the person and their career, but we do see that in middle adulthood, people are more likely to be downsized, and unemployment tends to last longer, and it's much harder to get a new job. And in some cases, in middle adulthood, we even see people end up in early retirement because it's just so difficult to find a new career or find a career when you're in this age range. Um, Because it's more stressful, this can also lead to negative health outcomes and problems for these individuals as they continue to age. This leads us to planning for retirement. When people are ending their time in middle adulthood and heading towards late adulthood, they're heading towards retirement age and making sure that one has enough uh, financial stability and things like that can be very crucial because retirement does bring a loss of income, it does bring a loss of status, and it can be very difficult with the way society is currently. That if you didn't have a very high paying job or you were able to set aside money as you age, that you could struggle during this time period in your life. There are things that people can collect as they get older and retire, such as Social Security, but this is only a small amount of money. Some jobs offer things like pensions, but once again, it's not really easy to live off of these things. So planning for retirement becomes very important as people age, and having savings to help them as they go forward and not have a lot of debt and so on. Um, so we'll end this with this very happy slide of this nice couple at the end of middle adulthood who are really enjoying gardening later on in life and clearly have planned very well for their retirement. Um, I hope you enjoyed the craziness of these slides. I drank a lot of coffee today, and it's late for me to be doing things like this. So I hope it wasn't terrible, and I hope that you get some information out of it. Look for those discussion boards that I stated earlier, and I will be starting to post late adulthood hopefully in the next couple days, and we will go from there. Have a great night. Take care.